Great. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon on an incredible webinar on Misinformation 101, not only learning from expert Peter Adams from NLP, but also from the fabulous educator Cathy Collins, who will be sharing along with other NLP staffers. I'm Shaylin Farnsworth. I'm Zooming from Iowa live right now. So if you hear disruption, it is my senior in high school. He is coming home, but we are thrilled to have you join us this afternoon. This is Misinformation 101. We plan to provide not only a brief introduction of what misinformation looks like right now in this landscape from Peter, but also applications on how to use this course in the classroom here before the wilds of summer and our students go off and are bombarded by mis and disinformation from their social media platforms. So that's a little bit about me. We do have a poll question that I would like for you to answer. This will help us understand who is joining us this afternoon. So please answer this. And I'm going to pass this over to Cathy. Cathy, you are an NLP ambassador. You are also a seasoned educator I've known for a long time. You are active on Twitter and you speak at conferences. Please introduce yourself. Let us know what you're currently doing and how people can connect with you as an NLP ambassador.
Absolutely. First of all, welcome to everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thrilled to be here this afternoon. I have had a pretty diverse a range of experiences. Started my life, my professional life as a reporter, actually, and then discovered I had this love of teaching and went back to school for my master's in library science, and was being a librarian up until last year when, or 2 years ago, when I was transitioned into a technology teaching position, which also currently involves my teaching three different electives, and one is media literacy for all of our 8th grade students. And so it was a natural then to seek out NLP for all the fabulous resources that are offered there.
Awesome. Thank you. I did put a poll up on your screen, and we have about 82% of participants answering the poll already. I'm going to pass this to Peter for a brief introduction of himself and allow those people who wish, if you would go ahead and answer the poll so we can gauge who our audience is joining us. Peter?
Sure. Thanks, Shaylin. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning in the case of at least one person I saw, 5:30 a.m. in Kyoto. So I'm Peter Adams. I head the education team at NLP. My team produces all of the content and resources for educators, including the Checkology content, as well as our professional learning programming. My background is in education. I was a classroom teacher in New York City for a number of years. A couple of years in the late 90s, I taught after school there and trained some incoming teachers, moved to Chicago, taught at the college level and high schoolers and after school, and then landed with NLP, where I've been since 2009. So I've been with NLP for quite some time.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to end the poll here and share the results. Can you see those results, Peter, up on your screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, so as is typical, we have a lot of people who are brand new to the News Literacy Project. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have you here with us. And also, again, it is a trend, but surprisingly, there's usually one that says, oh yes, I could lead this webinar with Peter. So nobody said that today. So let me give you a brief introduction of NLP before we dive into misinformation in the current landscape that our students are facing. The News Literacy Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we specialize in creating educator resources and programs to help students increase their knowledge in news and media literacy. We support Checkology, our flagship program, which contains lessons to use in your classroom from subject matter experts to NewsLit Nation with our community members, resource and where you can connect with Cathy, to all of our content, which Peter and his team creates. We believe that news literacy is an essential life skill. We want to make sure that students know how to think, not what to think. So all those critical thinking skills that are essential for students, not only in their academic, but in their personal, professional, social lives, so they can be advocates for themselves, for others, and really play a part in their civic and democracy in their community, and being an engaged citizen. So that is our mission and our goal. We hope to see news and media literacy across the nation in classrooms. And this is something special we bring to you. Like I said, Misinfo 101, not only a brief introduction, but also a course designed on Checkology, our free platform to use before our students enter summer. Cathy, I'm sure your students are ready to begin their summer break. And as you know, they have their phones tethered to them, and they're constantly bombarded by information from various social platforms, misinformation, disinformation, and we want our students to be able to identify facts from falsehoods. I do have to give a shout out to the librarians. I don't know if you saw this from Kearney, Nebraska this afternoon, that had their kids actually take over their library Twitter account. I'm not sure if they're on here, but I'm pretty sure some Nebraska educators are, and they were sharing everything they learned on one of our Checkology lessons. So if you're on Twitter, check that out. But I'm going to turn off my camera and pass this over to Peter. There is a Q&A down below. If you would like to ask a question to either Peter Adams or Cathy, you can go ahead and enter it in the Q&A. Resources will be shared in the chat over on the side. Remember, the chat defaults as to host and panelists only, so use the drop-down arrow so everyone can see your chat, but please enter the questions in the Q&A, and we will be sure to have those answered or even brought live so Peter or Cathy can answer live during the webinar. At the very end, there's a few announcements, a few links, and a short survey. So make sure that you get all of that before you end. But Peter, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Great, thanks, Shaylin. Let me share my screen and just make sure again that everybody can see this.
Yep, looks great.
Looking good. Okay, great. All right, so I've already introduced myself. I'm basically here to just give you a very quick overview of some of the things that I think are happening and relevant in mis and disinformation. That's the focus of today's session. And I wanted to just start with sort of the way we look at misinformation and kind of how it works and why this is so important. So, you know, we often underscore to educators and for students and the public that information is the basis for our, all the decisions we make, and our decisions are the basis for our actions. And so what misinformation tries to do is disrupt the foundation of that sort of civic trajectory at the base, where we're consuming information to figure out what we believe and what we think should happen, whether that's a policy or who we should vote for or something else. And that sort of redirects that trajectory in a way that's inauthentic, that's not in our best interest, that's not in the interest of our friends and family, our community, whoever we have in mind when we think about how to make these kinds of decisions. And this is a fundamentally exploitative relationship, right? So mis and disinformation is targeted at an audience, and it really seeks to capitalize on and exploit their beliefs and values, their religious faith, their desire for a more just or equitable society, their patriotism, and to use that to elicit a strong emotional reaction. Outrage is a common one, but also fear, anger, even hope, even some positive emotions. And it also sort of relies on exploiting our inbuilt cognitive biases. We have a bias toward immediate experience. We have a bias toward things that have happened recently. We have a bias to confirm our beliefs, our existing beliefs. And so mis and disinformation sort of seize on that. So I want to touch on that a bit today as well. But fundamentally, mis and disinformation kind of hijack and redirect our civic agency. So I wanted to just offer that as a frame up top. And I also wanted to share just a piece of election misinformation. This circulated in 2017 after the 2016 election, and alleged to be voter fraud in 2016. This is actually not Illinois, as the caption in the video said, but it is Russia. And some of you might recognize this because it was used by Sam Weinberg and his team at Stanford with a group of Stanford freshmen to see if they could recognize whether or not this presented strong evidence for the claim that this is Democratic voter fraud in 2016, perpetuated by Democrats in the US. And high school students, not freshmen on this one. 52% of the high school students that they studied and presented this to said that this was strong evidence of voter fraud. So more than half. And only 0.1%, I think a total of 3 high schoolers could find the source video. So I think this is a good reminder of something that a lot of educators already know, which is that students may be digital natives, but they actually don't always know how to get back to the source of a graphic or of a video or of a claim or even of a snippet of text, right? Either through lateral search or something like reverse image search. Another study that I wanted to kind of lift up here is a report that came out from the Election Integrity Project, which was a consortium of researchers who worked together to analyze misinformation in the 2020 election. And they had several key takeaways that I think are helpful and relevant, one in particular for thinking about misinformation generally. One is that, in 2020, it's a good reminder that the overwhelming majority of election misinformation was domestic. So I think 2016 got a lot of people talking about foreign actors and bad actors and the Russians, but largely we're now doing this to ourselves. This is the key insight, I think, in this report, though, that they found that incidents kind of congealed into narratives which shaped people's expectations and shaped the way they understood what they were seeing online, which further congealed into kind of conspiracy theories, which eventually just settled into conventional wisdom. We saw this around the allegations of election fraud, for example. It just became conventional wisdom among some Americans that the election was stolen, that there's something not right, that there was widespread fraud in states across the country. And all of those assertions turned out to be baseless. I mean, there was really no evidence of substantial fraud at all. In fact, the evidence indicated that 2020 was maybe the most secure election in recent history. And they also found that misinformation circulated in both a top-down and a bottom-up way. So big influencers with big followings were pushing misinformation, but also ordinary users with smaller followings were seeding these things up and getting picked up by some of those influencers. And then a small core of repeat spreaders are responsible for a large amount of misinformation. I think those are helpful to keep in mind, but I want to isolate this trend in particular, that incidents shape narratives, form conspiracy theories, become conventional wisdom. And I would offer this recent post. So this is a post from February of this year saying there's no food at this Walmart in Dixon City. All these coolers are empty. Look at this. And this is supposed to resonate with like supply chain issues and everything else. So let's just take a look at this post and then think together about how this dynamic shaped it.
I never seen anything like this in my life.
So I'm sure you've seen rumors like these, pictures of empty shelves, pictures of making supply chain claims. A lot of these things are out of context. They're years old photos or something like that. This is actually an authentic video, authentically shot in February at a Walmart in Dixon City. I can't remember what state that was in. But the coolers were being repaired. So there was a refrigerant leak, so they emptied them while they repaired the leak. But because that pre-existing narrative of supply chain issues was there for this particular person, I think they thought they recognized what was happening, shot a video of it, posted it to social media where it reinforced that idea among folks and sort of resulted in what I would say are more perceived incidents, right? So if somebody continues to see these posts, the next time they maybe go to Target and they see an empty shelf, maybe it's being transitioned from an Easter display to something else. They take a picture of it and they think they know what they're seeing. So it shapes the way we engage with evidence and just is a sort of self-perpetuating cycle. So I think that's really, really key to think about. We've seen that around the gas rumors as well. Gas prices are up for sure. They were at record lows during the pandemic. And as demand picked up, prices ticked up, and then Russia invaded Ukraine and it exacerbated that pricing squeeze. But They're not this high. This is an out of context shot. That's actually a gas station that's under construction and has ultra high prices on purpose so people don't accidentally pull in and try to get gas. So again, people are sort of primed to see things and recognize mis and disinformation narratives or political narratives and think they know what they're seeing, and it causes us to sort of misapprise the evidence, right? And to misunderstand what we're seeing. So I want to touch on just 3 other trends very quickly, and kind of 3 reasons people share mis and disinformation that I think are helpful to share with students, because often I think students think it's all like Russians and bots and trolls, and why do people do this? So one reason I think it's important to acknowledge is that a lot of people share mis and disinformation just to chase clout online, just to look for big followers, lots of likes and shares and clicks and attention, whether it's for dopamine or to drum up a huge account that they're later going to sell and monetize in some way, or to use for political purposes. So a lot of people are just chasing clout, and some people are sharing misinformation without knowing it, and a bit recklessly, out of a positive emotion, right? Out of a desire to support Ukraine, for example. And we've seen a lot of this with the war in Ukraine. Here's a Reddit post of a Time magazine cover that appears to be comparing Putin to Hitler, but it's actually a fake. It's a piece of digital artwork by a guy named Patrick Mulder, who also posted about it. And Twitter has tagged it manipulated media, but his Time magazine cover, the one on the left in particular, went viral right after the invasion. And it felt good to people to be able to do something, right? To condemn Putin in this way by amplifying this or liking it. The same with this post, which claimed that Ukrainian roads crews changed road signs to expletives directed at Russian troops. This was a doctored photo that Ukrainian roads folks circulated, but they didn't actually make those changes on the signs. But it felt good to think that was true for a lot of folks who are supporting Ukraine. Same with videos like these, which purport to be Ukrainian soldiers saying bye to their girlfriends and wives. These circulated pretty broadly. It started here on TikTok with almost 900,000 likes. That TikTok video jumped directly to Facebook and Twitter. Lots of social media posts are jumping between platforms. You see tweets on TikTok, you see TikToks on Twitter, you see both of them on Facebook and so on. And it got a lot of engagement everywhere it went, but it's out of context. These are soldiers saying goodbye to their wives for an earlier conflict in a documentary that was produced in 2016. I believe it was the soldiers headed to Chechnya in a 2016 documentary. You can find footage on YouTube, so this was very easy for someone to do. Just take this footage and share it. And maybe because it was posted to YouTube so recently, they thought that those were soldiers headed to the current conflict. It's hard to know. Lots of posts like this as well. Here's, Miss Universe Ukraine turning in her high heels for some combat boots. Again, people would like to believe this is true, but it's not. These photos are out of context. She's an airsoft rifle enthusiast. That's not a real weapon. This is something just from her Instagram account. The same thing happened recently with this alleged, quote, Ukrainian beauty who was credited with blowing up 52 invading Russian tanks. She's actually a medical doctor, highly decorated, as you can see, but it's just a quick out of context image. So lots of feel-good rumors like this Ghost of Kiev myth, kind of mythological fighter pilot circulating right now, and videos like this one. Allegedly the Moskva battleship, which recently sunk in the Black Sea, but that is actually a decommissioned Norwegian battleship in 2013. So a big takeaway here on this kind of clout chasing section is even misinformation that's amplified with good intentions can cause harm, can cause confusion. The Russians have pointed at some of these sort of pro-Ukraine fakes to allege that all information from Ukraine is faked, that they're staging deaths and other things, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And to recognize that hope is a common emotional trigger or target. So students should check that impulse, even if something feels good, even if it's something that's supporting a cause that they believe in, that they should be wary. And then some disinformation is solely motivated by personal gain. It's not all about Russian trolls or political players. Sometimes it's just people trying to make money or drum up big accounts. But plenty of people are circulating disinformation for political gain. Here's a recent rumor shared by Eric Trump. It's just an image of what purports to be current inflation rates. And it says, nothing more needs to be said, but that's not true. A lot more needs to be said. They're pretty off. They basically double the inflation rate for the last 2 years, depending on how you configure them. Fact checkers at USA Today broke them down both by monthly average and then the December rate of each year, which is how inflation rates tend to be tabulated both ways, and compared them. So there's a lot more to the story. So a meme isn't evidence. A screenshot of numbers doesn't mean it's true, even if it resonates with our biases. But there is a seed of truth there, right? Inflation is up, and that causes people to kind of lean into that. And again, it sort of congeals into a narrative and into conventional wisdom, and really shapes the way we then experience the world, I would argue, when we go to the store and see prices that are higher. This is a really fascinating example that circulated shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine and was making airstrikes. This infographic, quote unquote, circulated, saying that there are dozens of Russian airstrikes in Ukraine, but there are also Israeli airstrikes in Damascus and Syria. There are Saudis conducting airstrikes in Yemen, US airstrikes in Somalia. What do you all notice? Anybody notice anything in the chat if you want to tell me about this particular infographic? If you came across this, where your eye would go, what details you notice, what questions you might have. Anyone at all? Exactly. Yep. Jessica, Stephanie, they've got it. What is Redfish? Like, what is that? That's a brand, it's a logo. What's the source of this info? Kate's got it. So let's take a look at that. So first thing we could do, right, is do a quick Google search and just search Redfish. But if we do that, obviously the homepage for Redfish comes up at the top. So, let's go there as an exercise. We go to their homepage. I see a story about the CIA supporting a coup in Guatemala in 1954. I see pieces about British racism, about neo-Nazis in Germany, about Spain's housing crisis, and so on. But not a lot of information about what Redfish is. So if I were to stay here and find out what the Redfish site has to say about itself, which is not a reliable way to go, but as an exercise, let's look at About Us. It says Redfish is an award-winning digital content creator, creating documentaries to highlight grassroots struggles worldwide to build an alternative to the capitalist system. So that's interesting, but not very reliable, because I'm not going to ask Redfish what Redfish is. So let's search Redfish Media and then limit our results to news here at the top, and then see what we find. And the first piece mentions Kremlin misinformation in the headline, and I can see Redfish is in the preview text. So let's click on this. And if I'm moving quickly, maybe I don't have time to read this whole piece by Vice. I can look here at the subhead, which says a Kremlin-backed media outlet masquerading as left-wing news. So let me see where they actually mention Redfish. So an efficient way to do that is just to Control F and search for Redfish, and then pop down to the relevant paragraphs, right? So they have a tagline, objective but not neutral. That's interesting. It brands itself as a community-based organization. So let's keep scrolling down and look at other mentions of Redfish to see what it is. Social media companies have labeled it a Russian state-controlled entity. So this is a sort of sneaky Kremlin-controlled news outlet that sort of pushes Russian interests, which gives us a new way to look at all those pieces about problems in the West, in Spain, in Germany, and so on. So many people might recognize RT, although I think far few people do, but not very many people would recognize Redfish. It's a very subtle brand, clearly aimed at millennials and younger generations, online, digital only. And in fact, Russia's really good at this. They have a number of propaganda outlets. Some are well known, like TASS and Sputnik and RT, but others like Soapbox, Redfish, and In the Now are, again, just designed to look like quirky, kind of fun, softer news formats that have a strong social media presence, but may not be recognizable, right? So let's look at how this particular, a couple of ways this circulated then. It made its way to TikTok And it was confusing for people legitimately because a lot of infographics like this one or this map from The Guardian were circulating. So it was pretty easy to mistake for people who were doing a quick scroll. And here it is on TikTok from one account, just being shared with sort of ominous music, right? Don't pick and choose who you condemn. We should be condemning Israel as much as we are, the Saudis as much as we are the Russians, right? So this sort of false equivalency. But on the right, we have a much more typical TikTok, somebody dancing with music. But in this case, we have the text from the infographic, but not the actual infographic. So now it's become detached from its original context in a way that we don't have that redfish logo anymore, and there's no starting point to search this. So if you encounter the second one, that makes your job much, much harder. So misinformation iterates as it moves and evolves as it moves across the information environment. Here's another one, a rumor that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's very divisive and evokes very strong emotions from people, refused to applaud for Volodymyr Zelensky when he appeared before Congress. And it uses this C-SPAN clip and shows her holding her phone very quick, but that's actually false. She applauded 4 different times. In fact, Daniel Dale at CNN went back to the C-SPAN footage and counted them, right? So here's a partisan account, the Midas Touch, sharing this, or Midas, sorry, Touch, sharing this, again, for political gain, to foster sort of the partisan audience and to attack Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here's another instance of disinformation that's recent. Somebody mocked up a CNN screenshot and altered the bottom of the screen to read, to make a false assertion that Don Lemon asserted on CNN that Elon Musk could threaten free speech on Twitter by literally allowing people to speak freely. This is actually a screenshot of a satirical, quote unquote, news piece circulating as just a screenshot, which is always a red flag, right? A screenshot you can't check out. It doesn't have a link. There's typically a reason why people are screenshotting and not linking. And that's a doctored image. You can actually go back and use the Internet Archive's TV news archive to identify the footage, the actual footage. So I found that of Don Lemon in January of 2020. You can tell by his tie and his suit combo specifically, but also if you find the other elements there or the original video, and you can compare those. But this duped a lot of people. So there were people in the comments saying this is obviously satire, but there were lots and lots, in fact, most people commenting things like this. So this actually reinforced people's views of the media, it reinforced people's views of people on the left. So this was targeted at people on the right to really produce outrage and have them double down and re-entrench on some really divisive opinions and to turn them off to mainstream news sources. But it was baseless, right? It was a piece of satire, right? So again, I would highlight the fact that this plugs into an existing narrative and reinforces it. And the next time someone encounters something like this, they're more inclined to believe it without checking, which is a trend I think we have to disrupt as educators. So quick takeaways here: disinformation narratives really do hack our epistemologies, our ways of knowing, and they have a way of feeling true despite their lack of evidence, either through sheer repetition or by really resonating with our biases. So we really have to work on teaching students to stop and ask, how do I know this? Is my belief warranted by evidence? And things like that. Shaylin, how am I doing on time?
You're doing great. I do have a question, and it looks like
Okay.
you have, if you want to do another little piece and stop for questions.
Either way, we can do a couple now.
Okay. A question was asked: does NLP have advice for countering the strategy of whataboutism? Rather than deny the facts, many propagandists flood the space with not really comparable complaints and countercharges. What to do about that tactic? The example they gave was scientists are motivated by grant money. So what can be done, especially for educators, for the whataboutisms?
Yeah, I think that sort of relates to a larger point, which is that we have to be as good about teaching kind of logic checking and an understanding of what makes a claim not just accurate and factual, but also logical. I think that's a key point here. It's a logical fallacy to think that if I can impugn an opposing position somehow, in this case, kind of with a faulty assertion, that counts as evidence for my alternative explanation of something, right? So trying to poke holes in the consensus around climate change isn't actually evidence for any alternative theory or hypothesis about climate change. Trying to poke holes in or allege that, people who do vaccine science have conflicts of interest isn't evidence that vaccines cause harm. So that's a fundamental sort of thing I think that we can teach, is that the nature of evidence and return to like the nature of warranted belief, especially with science. And quick plug, I didn't plant this question, but we do have some STEM related lessons coming out for Checkology next year. So one about science and science related claims, one about data and database claims, and then one about health misinformation. So keep an eye out for those.
Yes, and Kate agrees with you in the chat, stating that logical fallacies must be covered. So Peter, why don't you continue on? There is one more question, and we definitely want Cathy to share, but I'm going to stop this and hold the question.
Okay, I'll be super quick. Conspiracy theories are obviously deeply embedded in disinformation. So there has been, a big push around this idea that Ukraine is staged. That's, almost a predictable response for any world event now. And it's circulated around sort of these ideas that Ukraine is staging deaths, and the Russians love this conspiracy movement because they love to amplify this and have seized on that as one of their own disinformation narratives. So posts like this have circulated, right? That this is Ukraine and these are bodies being staged. It's actually footage from a music video set before the war, shot in Russia, actually. This climate change protest in Austria, where people laid under tarps to highlight, the severity of climate change, and one of them, Move, was circulated as the same thing.
So
you can
we're going to use the at least 59 people killed, at least 149 people wounded. Those numbers are going to go up. There's just no question about that. I mean, you have fierce fighting in a number of locations around the country. You mentioned Chernobyl.
This is actually a climate change protest in Austria. The footage was taken from NBC and laid on top, and you can't tell because the Austrian reporter had a mask on. So, very tricky stuff circulating there. And a number of these, this has been a kind of narrative cluster. Here's a rumor on Telegram of a stunt dummy, and the assertion is that this is being prepped by Ukrainian soldiers, but that's footage from the set of a Russian TV series. This is from a movie set. So again, the more of these that circulate, it can kind of take on this sort of illusory truth effect, right? That it just becomes conventional wisdom that there's something going on with fatalities in Ukraine and things being staged, when in fact that's entirely baseless and fairly offensive given what we know about the crimes against humanity happening on the ground there. So just some quick reminders that conspiracy theories, do appeal to people because they satisfy deep psychological needs, not because people are short-sighted or deficient in some way. So that's an important point if you have students who do embrace these kinds of things, and to remember that bad actors really target and exploit our vulnerability to these kinds of things. So I love some takeaways here. I'll share these slides, Shaylin, with you, just recapping some of those key points.
Thank you. And we'll be sure to include those, Katie will, in the follow-up email. Kind of two questions, and I'm going to go reverse here because one will definitely be great to hear your response, but then we'll lead into Cathy because it's about students as well. So Peter showed a Facebook comment about stopping the fact checking. The fact checking is being countered and dismissed, discounted. Logical fallacies don't stop our politicians from pushing against expertise and winning, like the mask compliance. And I know it's kind of a question / comment. Anything to add, Peter, to that?
No, I mean, I think that underscores why we have to push back so hard against student nihilism and student cynicism, and this idea, I think, that's so prevalent, especially among teens, because they're teens, that all institutions are corrupt, that all forms of information are trying to manipulate us in one way or the other, which is just not true, right? Everything isn't, no information is perfect, but all information isn't nearly equal. Standards really do matter. Process really does matter. There are sources of information that have a concern for accuracy and fairness, that do take the time to correct even the most minor of errors. And that's a very strong and important signal. Doesn't mean any news organization is perfect, but it means there's a big difference between a standards-based news source that aspires to rigorous standards and an anonymous meme online or an anonymous post on 4chan or some conspiracy forum. So I think making that point and then helping them understand that the very people who are being fact-checked, who would love to be able to get their falsehoods by people and to manipulate you and exploit you with those, are the ones telling you not to trust the fact checkers. So it's just sort of a way to step back and say, who are you going to believe, right? The people who have something to really gain by lying to you or manipulating you, or the people who are actually doing that checking.
And you're getting mad applause, Peter. People are, yes, well put, get your students thinking. Definitely wanted to put a plug in there. The illustration of walking through students of how to identify the redfish and then having them search laterally instead of digging down deeper in their own website. I did want to mention on the Misinfo 101 course, we did include the new challenge that you worked with Cindy Otis on. Can you search like a pro that uses a lot of those advanced Google searches to help students with online information and has them debunk that conspiracy theory birds aren't real. And so this kind of leads into Jessica's question, which is great to hear from you, Peter, first, and then we'll turn it over to Cathy for her to answer and then also talk about classroom applications and what she sees. This will be perfect. I found that my students are becoming more cynical about any news. Having to teach about misinformation reinforces this idea. How do I help my kids to feel like news can be real and a good thing to know? So it's that, how do you prevent them from toppling over so then they are cynical about everything and develop that healthy skepticism?
Yep. So I think, you know, we touched on that a little bit, but I think it's vitally important that we hold up high quality examples of news and information as much as we hold up things that have some kind of problem or error, right? So too often, I think when people teach media literacy or news literacy, we're only looking at news reports that had a problem, that had an error, that have overt bias, and we're dissecting that and deconstructing that and talking about that. But that can give students the impression that that's the norm and not the exception, when in fact, the vast majority of standards-based news pieces don't include errors. They don't include overt or inarguable bias. And that's an important thing to sort of exemplify for them, right? And have them look at not what makes something problematic, but let's talk together about what makes this credible. Let's look at the sourcing. Let's look at who they quote and, you know, who they talk to, people in a position to know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Analyze the language, the tone, you know, how fair it is, and really then start to draw a contrast between something like that and an opinion piece or rhetoric from a pundit or a politician. And I think that can help kind of throw that into relief for students. But it's a vitally important thing to do, because propagandists and trolls and you know, the Russians would love for us to believe that everything is flawed. I don't know what I can believe, so I'm going to throw up my hands and give up on the idea of being able to know, which is exactly what you know, the very worst actors in the world would love if we just all thought there's no way to know you know, what's actually happening, and you know, that would be sort of the death of democracy. So not to be too dramatic, but that's kind of how I see it. So
but yes, and Peter, you are speaking to my English teacher heart here. It is essential to have those mentor texts, those mentor examples, and I'm sure Cathy has her pocket full of mentor digital examples, everything from online journalism to great infographics to perfect TikToks. I know we have a series, but what makes something a mentor example that students can hold it up to, that piece of misinformation and pick it apart. So what is the good pieces of examples? What are those mentor medias that we present? Cathy, I'm going to have you go ahead and start sharing if you would like to, but kind of kick us off. How would you use the Misinfo 101 course in your classroom? Where do you see this happening with your students? And also addressing the question, how do you address disinformation, misinformation without having them become cynical about everything that they read online?
Oh gosh. Okay, I am ready to roll here. I'm just going to share in a more it's what Peter shared was amazing, and I'm going to share my in the classroom perspective. And again, just letting everyone know, I've worked with high schoolers, but currently I'm working with middle schoolers. So they think they know everything. So I usually start off the conversation by showing them with a little spot the troll activity, you know, where they have to look at 8 different social media posts and figure figure out which one is a real account and which is not. And these are much more challenging than they realized. And that's usually a good kicking off point to the discussion of, why are we taking this 10-week media literacy course? What is this all about? What is the value in it? And so when they realize that they actually don't know everything and don't know how to evaluate, the high quality versus the misleading, the misinformation, which Peter went into great depth discussing, that's a good kicking off point. Checkology has been an absolute godsend for me in my classes. It is customizable. I love it. And just today started using actually the Misinfo 101 portion. I had already done the conspiracy theories and the misinformation, but what I am loving is that with Checkology, with this new course, there are these supplemental activities, which are great. So what I love, it's personalized, right? So everyone is at a different level in my classroom. And because of the way Checkology is set up, I can monitor who needs more help, who already gets it, and who's behind and needs some catching up. And so these exercises, the example of which Peter just went into, they're short, they're simple, and again, they're just ways for students to build skills. So those check center missions, can you search like a pro? Honestly, we're not there yet, but that will be my final week of the course. And that will be my way of assessing exactly, did we meet the learning objectives for my media literacy course? But evaluating evidence online, all of these, the Misinfo Quest, weather, all of these little activities are designed to be short and simple and effective in teaching students those skills. So I just can't say enough about the ability of a teacher to customize each lesson according to time and the level of students. From there, let me just share my screen for a moment here. All right, so, oops, forgive me my Zoom rustiness. Here we go. So Peter had already gone into this concept that the RAND project describes as truth decay. And moving on from that, and I think Peter also touched on this, the assessment of where our high school students are at as far as what they are believing and shouldn't be believing. And the statistics are pretty staggering. So we need to teach them how to, what I usually share is how, when I was a student and when other faculty members were students, we did not have to worry about this the way that these guys need to worry about it. So I try to emphasize, we did have our New York Times delivered to the door that we could rely on. And we did not have the internet with its slew of misleading and disinformation. So I start there. And then from there, I'm not so good at screen sharing. So I'm just gonna, I also lead in with a games approach. So in addition to the lessons that are on Checkology, I use things like Harmony Square. And again, these games just appeal to teenagers' ability. They want to be detectives. They want to win. And so this is just one example of a game where they have to, their role is chief disinformation officer, and they need to sort out in this little town of Harmony Square, they have to accumulate likes in order to win the game. And through that, they discover that it's pretty easy to manipulate information online. So that's just one example. I also customize, I mentioned Checkology, but in addition to Checkology, and I forget the source of this particular slideshow, but it is credited, and I will include the link in the chat for people to take a look at. Crash Course has two. There's a media literacy course, but that's a little too high level for middle school. So I sometimes will start off a Checkology lesson with just a short 10-minute crash course video blurb just to hook them and engage them. And as we know as teachers, that's what you have to do, or you will lose your audience quickly. And so this is just an example of a customized. This is a little bit of, why do, again, teaching students need to know the why, or they're not going to engage at all. And so this has a little bit of a different video clips, and again, showing them how to use a reverse image search, and then going to the Check Center in Checkology. That's a way to reinforce those skills. The Check Center also can't say enough about. There are these short tutorials that students can go to as they realize they're not doing so well on these little learning activities, these supplemental activities in the Misinfo 101 course. They can then just jump to the Check Center and figure out what it is they need to do in order to figure stuff out. So, all right, and let's see. Again, and this particular example, there are many more examples within these supplemental activities in the Check Center, so highly recommend just checking it out. Let me go to the nuts and bolts of being a teacher and creating a course. So all you have to do is register online for an educator account. It's free, and from there you can customize the course content according to the level of your students, and again, as I said, your time that you have each day, or in my case, it's once a week for each 8th grade section. And then in addition to that, you can assess them. And I don't always assess them. It depends again on my time and what I need to cover, what I feel is really high priority. And the press freedoms is really important to me. And in my situation, I collaborate with a civics teacher who teaches, we have a whole, 8th graders are not only taking media literacy, they're also taking civics. So we make sure we're not overlapping, or if so, we're reinforcing versus repeating content. So great opportunities for collaboration with Checkology. Also need to put a plug-in for the SIFT, because another way I often integrate that Checkology content is through those classroom ready slides. If you've not signed up for the SIFT newsletter, I think the link is in the chat there to do that. And that is another fabulous way to hook your students into whatever your topic is for the day. The classroom ready. So let's cover what's in the rumor mill this week out there in current events land. And let's take a look at these images. I also will sometimes, again, customize that content a little bit one step further, and you can do a Kahoot where you're assessing the whole class at once in a more fun way. You could do, what else? A Jamboard where you put different images on a slide and then have them do in a group, because they love working together. A little friendly competition, have them analyze images. I also will sometimes integrate the New York Times, the picture of the day, where they'll have a picture that was a headline without the caption. And that is a great way for students to practice their visual literacy skills, which often we forget are so important. So yeah, that's just, I'm going to stop my share for a second. Those are just some of the ways that I've gone about teaching the content. And I do change it up. I admit I get bored myself. I have to keep it interesting. And with just the wealth of information that's in the Checkology course there, that lets me do that easily, pull things, change things around. Also, as I mentioned, sometimes I'll discover something was a bit over the level of what, coming from a high school to a middle school, of what my students are ready for. And although all of the content I feel is totally appropriate for middle school and high school, I will sometimes just customize it more so that I'm hitting where I know the level of understanding is for the general population as I go about teaching these courses.
Cathy, I'm gonna have you stay on just a little bit so you
Sure.
you can walk through this with me, because you mentioned a lot of things that everybody has been asking in the chat. The link for that, the link for that, and so
Yeah,
the team is sharing all the links that you're talking about. But people want to know, what do you find the biggest difference when talking about mis and disinformation, the skills needed between your middle school and high school students? And you talked a lot about the Check Center, so I'm going to pull that up. If you want to talk a little bit about high school and middle school students, where you see the key differences. As you mentioned, Checkology has lessons that are great. I would say probably about 5th grade on up. We do have some upper elementary on the resource library, Google Slides that you can use, but our vast collection of resources to use in the classroom is on Checkology. And you mentioned the Check Center, which helps build those habits of mind. So I'm going to pull this up while you talk a little bit about middle school and high school and those skills that people find on the toolbox.
Yeah, so the toolbox has tutorials on things like geolocation, where you can show students how to zoom in using Google Street Maps on a location to see whether something actually did take place in that location. Lateral reading, I think that's a hugely important skill, and that's easy to teach middle schoolers about. I think the vast majority of our middle schoolers just don't realize that the internet, Google is not the start and stop, that there's advanced search features within Google. And if I can just, have them leave my course learning that, then they are well on their way, right?
Yes, exactly.
Level research and beyond. So,
Google is not a source. Please don't list Google as your source.
Yeah, or just realize, there are ways to fine tune that search result box so that you get closer to exactly what you're looking for, right, Shaylin?
Exactly. And so, as Cathy mentioned, this is loaded of videos, and you'll see the universal share here. So you can share this with your students. You can put this on their LMS so they can review this, so they can have it handy. It's a share. You can share it with colleagues, but these are all tutorials that Peter and his team. So you'll see Peter and you'll see Hannah in here, and I'm sure Pam. So Peter and his team have developed to help walk you through and walk your students through those common online skills needed to combat that mis and disinformation. It is part of Checkology. Somebody asked, this is our Checkology platform. Pam is working on a new tutorial now about web archives, of course. So it is the dashboard, as Cathy was talking about, is where you create your classes, where you get information, the data collection. The content is where you choose your content. Check Center helps develop those habits of mind with challenges. And as Cathy said, the resources, journalist tabs, which you have access to journalists to zoom into your classroom and give that firsthand experience with your students. Cathy, have you or any of your colleagues ever done a journalist visit before?
Not yet, but it's on my list. Yeah, and that's something I know NLP offers, and it looks phenomenal. I haven't done it in this particular course at this particular level, but that's another great resource through NLP that I look forward to using in the future.
Yeah, newsroom to classroom, invite journalists into your classroom, but also customizing. So it's very easy to create an account. As Cathy said, you don't need to download any specific software. You just need an up-to-date browser. We are aligned to COPA, FERPA, all of those privacy policies you can send my way, and we will get those filled out for you. We do have single sign-on. I know that was a question, John. We do have single sign-on in Microsoft and Google. You can put the links on your LMS. We don't have deep links because we want to remain free for educators and students. And of course, as we know, those platforms want us to pay to have our content. So we have single sign-on and you can integrate that way. So it's a perfect marriage of keeping it free and accessible for all students and all educators. But once you create a class on the dashboard to assign the Misinfo 101 course or to customize it, you simply push the Assign the Course button. And what you'll notice, it defaults based on what grade level you chose. So either a high school or middle school default course. But this is where you can find all of the preset courses we've developed or other educators have shared with us to change your course. Again, what I went to underneath this course is the change course, and I'm scrolling down preset course, and you'll see there is the Misinfo 101. Now, I'm going to quickly for you know that there's a tutorial that Kim, our colleague, made on the Misinfo page, and you can definitely watch it many times, but you see that there are 6 items in it. Once you push assign, it says, okay, it's been assigned to your course and students are off and running. Now, let's say you're like my son who only has 2 weeks of school left, and you want to customize the course and you want to highlight those major lessons and maybe one exercise. So you go under change the course or customize the course, and this will let you customize that course. Now, this is making a template of a preset course. So you just have to quickly put it into a mini, I'm just calling it mini 101. You don't have to spend a lot of time on here. Description, I'll just put shorter because this is my own template. And when I push save, Cathy, anything to interject here?
Oops. Yes, I just wanted to answer a couple questions I saw popping up in the chat here that are related. Questions from a librarian, yay librarians. 4 more classes, where do I start? I recommend info zones, which just goes about defining the different types of information. I think that's a great starting point, and that would be accessible for younger students as well, absolutely. And then there was one more question, where was it? Oh, from Joanne, do you recommend going through Checkology on our own? How long would it take? Hours? Honestly, I've started, I haven't, it's not as though I looked through every single, lesson and went through it all myself. I looked at the general descriptions, on that dashboard, on that content section, and then just chose from there. And as I said, I've adapted as I've progressed through the different quarters. I teach it's a 4-quarter, 10-week course, so which gives me the ability to change it up and do what works best. But info zones is more general. Depends where you want to focus. If you want to teach them about the standards of journalism, which is also really important. There's just so much out there, but it's all very safe. I would choose, just looking at that front page. It wouldn't take you that long actually to just look at the descriptions. That's how I would approach it.
That's a great question. And that's why we've developed those comprehensive lesson guides. We know teachers' time is valuable, and we have made this so easy for you. It's on the link tree, but also I'm sure Kim or Jordan will drop that in the chat, or Katie. Our comprehensive lesson guides lays it out. It tells you about how many minutes, the lessons, objectives, the questions. And so you feel like you don't have to go through every single element of a lesson. It's kind of the Cliff Notes version. So definitely check those out. It's a great place, as Cathy was mentioning, not only read the description, but you can go ahead and check out those comprehensive lesson guides. So as Cathy mentioned, let's say you want to include info zones. It's a great place to start, especially for our younger learners, to help them understand primary purpose, zoning information. You'll see here's what's in the course right now. We have a lesson. We have some exercises, a challenge. Here's can you search like a pro, conspiratorial thinking. But let's say I'm not going to touch upon conspiratorial thinking, but I definitely want to put in this info zones. It's a great interface. It's just drag and drop. It is not difficult to change and customize it. So again, it defaults with 6, and you can simply drag and drop the info zones that Cathy was speaking about and put it right into your course. Cathy? Oh, you're on mute, Cathy. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I had my hand up from earlier. I had nothing to add.
Oh, no, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else.
But yeah, agreed. There are multiple approaches to take. Oh, maybe one thing I would add is starting with vocabulary, especially with the younger learners, is always good. A word wall, just to help them to understand misinformation versus disinformation, and that is included in the guidebooks. There's there's a second chapter in the global playbook. Called Give Facts a Fighting Chance. I think that's available as well in the resources section. And that has some basic vocabulary that I always use.
And just like Cathy mentioned, each of our lessons, you'll see a purple icon with 2 W's for word wall on the side. So you can access that vocabulary. That's great to front load, to discuss, to kind of provide that foundation of terms that students should be familiar with and that they'll encounter not only in lessons, but all of these terms are used by professionals, journalists, subject matter experts in the field. We could talk forever. Cathy, thank you for sharing your brilliance. Peter, I don't know if you want to pop on. Thank you as well. We are running out of time, so a few things that I want to leave everyone with. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I see our team is answering questions. Again, we